Well, welcome to the second annual I Heart Pluto Festival, the last night and the second to last program. And we've had a really great celebration this week. Looking at the science and culture and history of Pluto. In this segment, we're going to relive Clyde Tombaugh's Day of Discovery. And so we're going to do a tour around downtown Flagstaff and up here at Lowell Observatory. Before we do that, I just want to mention a couple of things about the festival. My name is Kevin Schindler, and I'm the historian here at Lowell Observatory. And I'm coming to you from the plate vault of Lowell Observatory down deep in the recesses of what's called the Schindler building. And behind me are thousands of photographic glass plates, including one right above my head in the little yellow there, right there. That one is a special one because that's one of the Pluto discovery plates that Clyde Tombaugh used to make the discovery on this night, 91 years ago. We've had a great celebration looking at the scientific and cultural heritage of Pluto. We've also had ongoing programs this week. Two of them end tonight. One of them is our art show by the International Association of Astronomical Artists. And last night we heard a great presentation by them. If you missed that, you can go to the Lowell Observatory YouTube page. And in fact, all of our I Heart Pluto programs are on there, so you can watch those at your leisure. We also have our friends down in downtown Flagstaff, Karma Sushi Bar Grill. Tonight's the last night to get the Pluto roll, which they bring back every year in honor of the fact that Clyde Tombaugh ate dinner there in 1930. It wasn't the Black Cat Café then. It was called the Black Cat Café then, not Karma Sushi. And we'll hear about that in the tour in a little bit. Another ongoing program we have that still is going to go on for a few more days involves amateur radio operators. And we've got a group set up in the parking lot. Like I said, they'll be here a few more days. And this has been a really great time because they've made contacts with more than 4,400 people around the world in more than 100 countries now. So they've really been talking up Pluto to a lot of different people around the world. And, this is such an important day because not only are we celebrating the 91st anniversary of Pluto, but the Perseverance lander also arrived at Mars just a couple hours ago. And so this is just a really exciting day to celebrate space and the quest for knowledge and our inherent desire to explore. It's a really great day to remember that. And we'll keep remembering, of course, this is just a celebration going on this week, but we continue to celebrate science every day of the year here at Lowell Observatory. Celebrating the science that our astronomers do and reaching out. Right now with COVID, we've been doing a lot of things virtual, but we look forward, like everybody else, to getting back in person. There's another thing you can do to participate in Pluto if you really love Pluto. Our gift shop, our online gift shop, has a lot of Pluto items, such as this mask that is pretty handy right now. So a lot of really great ways to celebrate. And if you like the program that we're bringing with I Heart Pluto Festival and other things that we do at Lowell Observatory, we certainly welcome donations. If you go to the I Heart Pluto page, there's a little donation button in the upper right. So we really appreciate your thoughts. We want to help bring more of these kind of programs. That really helps out. So I mentioned earlier, tonight we're going to relive Clyde Tombaugh's Day of Discovery. And he was living up here at the observatory, and his whole Discovery Day centers around the observatory in downtown Flagstaff. And it's nice that between his a book that he wrote and letters that he wrote and certain memories that he wrote down, we have a pretty good idea of what he did when on that day. So we're going to play a video here. It's about 25 minutes. And it's going to relive that history. And I think it's a lot of fun just to think this guy is 24 years old and just think about the excitement that was going through his head when he made this discovery. So this video was put together by Rezi Balco, who we're very grateful for doing that. And our Danielle Adams did some editing with it, so it works out in this system. So like anything we do here at the observatory, there's a whole team behind the scenes that make things happen. And that's one of the great things about Lowell Observatory is such a great team that works together to bring, quality research, quality programming. Everything we do is really top notch and requires a lot of people to pull it off. So we really appreciate that. So I apologize for the person giving the tour. He's kind of a shady character, but I hope you enjoy the tour of Clyde Tombaugh's Day of Discovery. So let's play it now. Clyde Tombaugh's Day of Discovery, which was February 18th, 1930, started like so many of his other days at the observatory here. In fact, all of his other days. They started right where I'm standing here. The building behind me was kind of the center of his life. Upstairs was the apartment where he lived. Downstairs to the left, the corner office, was Clyde's office. And the blink comparator room that housed the machine called the blink comparator that he used to discover Pluto was right next to his office. And then going in this direction is the walkway that goes up to the telescope he was using to take pictures to search for this planet. So his whole life is centered right around in this area. And so his day, centered right around here. So what we'll do first is go up to the apartment, which of course is where he started every day. And then we'll kind of see what he did around here. Then we'll go downtown and then come back here and kind of follow Clyde's footsteps for the day. We're now upstairs in this Lifer building, and I put my mask on because we're indoors and we have staff working around here. And up here is where Clyde Tombaugh lived. Now, in this section of the building, which is the west wing, as it were, there were bedrooms all along up here where different single staff members would live. We're not sure exactly which of these places, which of these rooms Clyde Tombaugh lived in. But through the years, all of these bedrooms were turned into offices, except for this one. And this one stays as an apartment. And so in honor of Clyde, we call this the Tumble Apartment. So let's take a look inside. Still fogged up here. So the apartment didn't look like this back in Clyde's day, but it was certainly one of the places where staff would stay and live. But you imagine Clyde, whether it was exactly this room or across the hall, his day started pretty much the same every day. On the 18th, he woke up at 7 o'clock, like he did every other day. And when I say every other day, he had been working here for not quite a year. He was 23 years old when he got on the train in Kansas to come over here to Flagstaff to accept this job. And so imagine February 4th, 1930, he turned 24 years old. And so on Discovery Day, he was just a couple weeks past his 24th birthday, and really, in so many ways, living a dream. He grew up on a farm. He got interested in astronomy at nighttime. He had such great dark skies in Illinois and then later in Kansas. And so he built his own telescopes and he learned about the sky and he got really good at drawing planets. And that's how he ended up at the observatory. He sent some of his sketches of Jupiter and Saturn to the director here. And the director of VM Slifer happened to be looking for somebody to help with this search for planets. The timing was exquisite. And Clyde got this letter back that turned into a job offer to come here. So imagine he's 24 years old. He's getting paid to do his passion. He's living on site here. He's got a great view of the San Francisco peaks. He's really living a dream. And every day he would wake up to this. So on Discovery Day, 7 o'clock, he woke up and, got ready for the day. And then he went downtown to have breakfast. And this was what he did every day for the past several months. He didn't cook much for himself. He would go downtown to his favorite diner, which was the Black Cat Café, which today is called Karma Sushi. So 7 o'clock in the morning, Clyde gets up and heads downtown. So let's go downtown and see where he ate and what he did that morning. So we're now in downtown Flagstaff, and like Clyde did most mornings, he came down here to check the mail and go to breakfast and such. We're standing on San Francisco Street, so a half a block in that direction is Route 66, which had just been built a couple of years before Clyde got to town. Just another half block in the other direction is kind of a famous spot in a movie, Forrest Gump. That's where Forrest was running through town, and the famous "It Happened" scene. That was filmed right on this side. Right in the middle is this building where Aspen Sports is. And back in 1930, that's where the post office was in Flagstaff. And that's where Clyde made his first stop to go up there and get the mail. Then when he left, he walked down to the Black Cat Café, and we'll check that out. So now it's breakfast time. Clyde comes over to what was then called the Black Cat Café. Today it's Karma Sushi. And so this is where he ate breakfast, which he had a lot of his meals here today. And just to get a perspective of where we are, we're standing on Route 66. And just across the street from us is the train station where Clyde landed less than a year earlier that he came to town. And in fact, that train station was built just a year or two before he arrived here. And Route 66 was pretty new also, just a year or two before he got here. So this, back in Clyde's day, was kind of newish along here. But the Black Cat Café was a cafe in Flagstaff for a long time. It was a very popular eating place. So that's where he ate a lot of his meals. After breakfast, Clyde drove back up the hill to the observatory and came back into what we know today as the Schindler building. So his apartment is right above us. And right here was his office. And this is kind of neat to me today, partly because this great painting by Greg Mort, who is a spectacular artist and also on the Lowell Advisory Board. Over here is Clyde Tombaugh, right next to what was his office. And today, this office belongs to Amanda Bosch. Amanda has a long history of Pluto research. She's done a lot of work with occultations, and she was part of the team that discovered the atmosphere of Pluto. So it's neat to have a Pluto researcher still in this office today. So this was Clyde's office. When he came back from breakfast that day, he put some stuff down, and then he went into the room right next door. And this office, which is now occupied by Jeff Deering and Frank Cornelius of our technical team, that was where the blink comparator machine was set up. This machine that held photographic glass plates. And so Clyde would take a picture in the sky, wait a few days, take a picture of the exact same place, develop them, put them each on this blink comparator, and the blink comparator had a microscope eyepiece. And so you look through it, and you'd see a small section of that plate, and the mirror inside would flip, and then you'd see the same small section of the other plate. So that blink comparator was set up in this office, and that's where Clyde spent a lot of his day. And he really had a regular schedule. On the clear nights, he would be up with the telescope, taking images of the sky. When they say images or pictures, they were on 14 by 17 inch glass plates. That's how they took pictures. It was like a big piece of film. So clear nights, he would be up there taking pictures. And then during the daytime, after developing these pictures, he would be examining them on the blink comparator. Now, to take one plate, it's only an hour exposure or so, which for astronomy, think about staring through a guide eyepiece for an hour is a long time, but in the overall scheme of things, it's not a long time. And so that wasn't so bad, but then to examine one set of plates, it could take a week just to examine one set of plates because you're taking a picture of the sky that represents about the size of your fist arm's length, and there may be 200,000 or 300,000 stars on there. You have to look at every single one to see if it's changed position. If it's changed position, it may not be a star, but something a lot closer to us, like a planet. So this is where he spent a lot of his time. So on the morning of discovery, 9 o'clock, he's back at the observatory, and he's inside the blink comparator room looking at those plates. Now today, the blink comparator room, as I said, is an office, but the machine, the blink comparator machine, we still have inside our Rotunda Museum. So we're going to go down there and take a look at the machine that it was using. We're very pleased to have this back. For several years, the blink comparator machine was on display at the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., but we now have it back on site. This was the machine Clyde Tombaugh used to make the discovery. So you can imagine hours in a day he would spend without the case on it. He'd be looking through this thing, and when this is all working, there are lights behind it, and the lights illuminate the glass plates where you can see the little dots. This is the microscope eyepiece. So you can imagine he's spending hours looking through this thing, and when this is turned on, there's a clicking sound. It's looking at that plate and this plate, that plate, this plate. And that's what he's doing for hours. So you can imagine he starts doing this at 9 o'clock, and he's going to do this for 3 hours till noon. And so every once in a while, every 20 minutes or so, he has to get up and just stretch and look around. Because if you can imagine looking through this thing, all he's looking at are dots. And after a while, your eyes start playing tricks. It's hard to focus, so you have to stop for a little bit, do something else, and then come back. So he sat at this eyepiece for 3 hours, with a couple breaks in between, until noon. And then it was time for lunch. So we headed back down to the Black Cat Café. So it's 1 o'clock. Clyde's back up on the hill. He's back in what we call today the Schindler building. And he's back in the blink comparator room. This is 1 o'clock. The next 3 hours, he spends looking through the eyepiece again, taking a few breaks here and there, but very painstakingly looking through that thing, looking at every single dot to see if it changed position. At about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he saw something that did change position. And this wasn't the first time he saw this. In fact, it wasn't that unusual. He would often see things that change position. Sometimes it might be a piece of lint on one plate or the other. Maybe it was a variable star that was bright one day and not so much the other day. It wasn't unusual to have what he called planet suspects. And he would have to stop. And he always took a backup picture also, backup plate. So we would pull that out to see if it appeared in the same place as the comparative plates. And then he would measure them, because measuring them, maybe it was an asteroid. Asteroids are going to be visible also just as a little dot. But by measuring the amount it changed from one day to several days later, based on how much it changed, you can tell how far away it is. And so if it moved a really great distance, maybe it was just an asteroid. But if it moved this distance, it's not an asteroid, it's not a star, maybe it's a planet. So at 4 o'clock, he sees this thing change its position, and he stops and he measures it like usual, and then he gets the backup plate, and holy cow, this looks like it's behaving like a planet. The amount of distance that's changed is definitely on the backup plate. And so he studied it for about 45 minutes, and then he walks next door to this office. And at the time, that was Carl Lamplin. Carl Lamplin was one of the 3 full-time astronomers here at the time. Carl Lamplin worked here with VM Slifer, who was the director, and E.C. Slifer, who was VM's brother. And E.C. at the time was off in Phoenix, working the state legislature. So at the time, there was 2 full-time astronomers and Clyde the assistant. So Clyde goes to Carl Lamplin's office, says, "Come here, check this out." And then he goes down this hallway, and you think about how long this hallway is. It's, I don't know, 30 feet or something like that, 50 feet. But you wonder, and what's going through the mind of this 24-year-old who was brought here by VM Slaver specifically to search for a planet that Percival Law started looking for 25 years before. Percival Law had died. The project had died. It was recommenced. And he's hired. Clyde's hired specifically to look for this thing. And now he's walking down the hallway to say, Dr. Slafer, I found your planet X. I mean, what's going through his mind at 24 years old is hard to say. But he said he was very excited and was trying to maintain as much composure as possible. So we went down there and got VM Slafer, and VM Slafer and Carl Lamplin and Clyde were all very excited. We all came back to the blink room and stood around, and they all did measurements together and looked at the backup plates and said, this really looks like a good candidate. So Clyde, don't tell anybody, because none of us are going to tell anybody yet, because we have to see more. Let's go back tonight and take a picture of it with the big telescope. Because, these images that Clyde has been studying were taken with a telescope that takes wide-angle pictures of the sky. Now that we know where in the sky to look, we can zoom in on it with the big telescope, the 24-inch refractor, and see if we can see a disk or if there are moons around it, other things that might tell us, yes, that is a planet. And so essentially he says, Clyde, let's just keep it quiet. And tonight, come back up here and rephotograph it with the big telescope, and then we'll look at those pictures. And as we'll find out, it would be a very long night for Clyde, and ultimately he'd have to wait for another night. And you can only imagine, he's 24 years old. Sunsets at 6:12 or so. It's now about 4:45. And so, he's got to just try to maintain his excitement or maintain his composure, even though he's very excited. And so, he's got to wait till it gets dark enough. And so by 6 o'clock, it's dinner time. It's not dark enough. And so he's going to go back downtown for dinner and to do his usual thing. So we'll head back downtown now. So Clyde is back downtown, but it's a lot different than this morning. This morning was just another day. He was coming down to get his mail. He's going to go to breakfast, go back up to the observatory and do his regular work of blinking. Now it's nighttime. He's waiting for it to get dark. And so he comes down and picks up the mail again. And then just like this morning, he's going to walk over to where the restaurant is to have dinner. But now, instead of just having another day at the office, he's really excited. When is it going to get dark so I can photograph this planet? So pick up the mail, then he's going to go to the restaurant. So let's go that way. So Clyde is back here for dinner time. And after this, he's going to go up and see if it clears up, but it doesn't. So after he's done here, he goes up to the observatory. He's going to just try to keep busy until the clouds clear up. It's fun to come back here today, not just to relive Clyde's footsteps, but also our friends at Karma Sushi celebrate with the Pluto roll, which is a very delicious addition to the cuisine of Flagstaff. So at this time of the year, they always make this, and we're really pleased to celebrate I Heart Pluto with them. So dinner is over. It's still cloudy outside. So Clyde came over to the Orpheum Theater, and the Orpheum still stands today. It's a historic theater in Flagstaff. It goes back a century, actually. There was an older theater here one time that collapsed when snow piled on top of it in the 19-teens, but they rebuilt it as the Orpheum Theater. And by 1930, it was a popular place for entertainment. In fact, right in the middle of downtown Flagstaff, behind me, which if you're looking west up on the hill, is the big telescope dome at Lowell Observatory. So you can see how close everything is. The observatory is downtown. So Clyde came over here to the Orpheum Theater and decided to watch the Virginian with Gary Cooper. So let's go inside and take a look. So here we are inside of the Orpheum Theater. Somewhere in here, the night he discovered Pluto, Clyde is sitting here watching this very movie, The Virginian with Gary Cooper. And this movie has kind of a neat history that's sort of tied to Lowell Observatory. The movie is based on a book by Owen Wister that was published in 1902. 1902 is the year that Percival Law first suggested there was a ninth planet out there. But the author was Owen Wister, who, like Percival Law, went to Harvard. And so there was a lot of overlap at Harvard. Percival graduated in 1876. Theodore Roosevelt graduated in 1880. And Owen Wister graduated in 1882. They all knew each other. In fact, Owen Wister, when he published The Virginian, he dedicated it to Theodore Roosevelt, who was then president. So there's some neat Harvard ties, Lowell Observatory ties with the movie sort of in the book. But you can imagine Clyde is sitting here. How much he's focused on the movie, who knows? Because he's anxious to get outside. And so he watches the movie, goes back outside, and it's still cloudy. And so he just heads up to the observatory, and he's going to wait out the clouds up there. So after the movie, Clyde looks outside. It's still cloudy. So he comes back to the observatory, and he just tries to stay busy, hoping the clouds will move away. He sorts the mail. He does some reading. And finally, by 2 a.m., he realizes he might as well go to bed because it's still cloudy. And even if it wasn't, the area of the sky that he needs to photograph, which is in the constellation Gemini, that area of the sky is set. So he's going to have to wait another night to confirm his great discovery. So you imagine 24 years old, he's discovered a planet, but he needs to confirm it. He has to wait till another night. How well did he really sleep that night? But he had to go to bed sometime. So he went to bed, thinking, I've discovered a planet, the only American to that point to discover a planet. And it's really a magical day that he lived, and one that he would, of course, never live again, anything quite like that. But he did go to bed, and over the ensuing days, it finally did clear up. He was able to take pictures through the 24-inch Clark telescope, and also Carl Lamplin took pictures with a 40-inch reflecting telescope. And so for the next several weeks, the scientists here studied it, and by mid-March decided, this looks more planet-like than anything else. This is a planet. They spent a certain amount of time trying to figure out its orbit, and that took even longer. But they had studied enough to decide to make an announcement. And so they decided to announce it on March 13th, 1930, which is really a neat coincidence of that date, because it was March 13th in 1781 that William Herschel discovered Uranus, and March 13th, 1855 is the date that Percival Law was born. So March 13th, 1930 would have been Percival Law's 75th birthday. So what a perfect day to announce the discovery of a planet. And remember, we said before that Clyde was told by Jim Slifer, don't tell anybody about this discovery. Well, he didn't tell anybody. And as we found out later, the way his parents found out was somebody working for the local newspaper called up on March 13th and said, Mr. Tombaugh, what do you think about what your son did? Mr. Tombaugh, what did he do? That's how we found out that Clyde had discovered a planet. He didn't even tell his parents. They had no inkling that it was happening. So it's a really great story, the discovery of Pluto, and the idea of the small town boy making it big, and the unlikelihood of him, this farm boy who ends up working at the observatory, and this planet that he discovered, Pluto. Another unlikely thing is that it wasn't the planet that they were looking for. Percival Law predicted a really big planet whose gravity was tugging on Uranus and Neptune. Pluto is really small, and its gravity couldn't do that to those planets. The planet that we're searching for, we know today, doesn't exist because of the inaccuracies of the estimates of the size of the planets. If they knew how big the planets actually were, these apparent movements were, taken care of. But they happened to find this small planet where Percival Law thought one was. So there's so many unlikely parts of it. It's such a great story, and to be able to retrace that history on the anniversary of the discovery, allows us to relive not only an important scientific discovery, but also a very personal story. So that's the day of discovery for Clyde Tombaugh. Thanks for joining us. Well, thanks for sitting through that guy. Holy cow, what an adventure. Like we were talking about, this is Discovery Day. And so, we can really relive it 91 years ago on this day. A similar temperature outside, probably, based on the historic records. So much of what Clyde did and the places he went to, we can recreate. And the Orpheum Theater, and going to where the post office was and where the restaurant was, it's neat to be able to relive that a little bit and put ourselves in his mind a little bit. So we've got a few questions here. We'll talk about first a couple about the Blink comparator from our friends Jim Davies again. Great to see you. And Storbos, Art and Sharon. Great to see you. Who made the Blink comparator? The Blink was made by the optical firm Carl Zeiss over in Germany, and it was invented in 1904, probably right around that time, by physicists that were working with Carl Zeiss. It was a very specialized piece of equipment. The Storbos asked if they were widely used at the time. They were very specialized just for use by astronomers, and there weren't that many people that had them. So these were specialty made. They weren't mass produced by any means. So there weren't all that many around. In fact, if you just do a Google search for Blink comparator, most of the times you're probably going to come up with the one that Clyde used because it's still around and on display at a public place here at the observatory. That's not the only one we had here at the observatory. Clyde used that Blink. If I go back a little bit, it arrived around 1911 because in the early searches for Pluto, Carl Lamplin, one of the astronomers, was kind of helping out, as did some others through the years. And he strongly suggested to Percival Law, if we're going to do this efficiently and accurately, we should get a machine to do it, because the previous method was to take pictures several nights apart, and these pictures are on photographic glass plates, and then overlap them on each other. And then with the backlight, look and see if any dot didn't quite overlap. And when you're talking about 200,000 or 300,000 dots on each 14 by 17 inch glass plate, that's not a very good way of doing it. So the Blink comparator allowed you to systematically look at a small section that was magnified and to systematically look at every single dot and compare from one day to the other. So it was really important to be able to do that accurately. Now, it also took patience. If you can imagine, you're looking at dots. That's all you're looking at through that eyepiece. After you're staring through that for a while, your eyes start playing tricks and things start moving and everything. So that's when you had to take those breaks. Clyde Tombaugh, as I think we mentioned in the video, between the first year he was searching for the planet, and then a dozen years afterwards, when he continued searching the sky for other planets and other objects, he estimates 7,000 hours looking through that eyepiece. And that is just a mind-boggling amount. It took somebody with patience and dedication. You can't just do a quick scan, you have to do it systematically. And that's, I think, one of the things that make it such a unlikely discovery. There's so many things that make Pluto's discovery unlikely. That's one of them, and just how difficult it was to do that. Now, years later, the observatory, well, Percival Law, gosh, I'm mixing up all my astronomers. Percival Law started the search in 1905. Clyde Tombaugh came here in the late 20s, discovered Pluto in 1930. And if you look behind me, the top couple shelves of these wide envelopes, each one of them contains one of these photographic glass plates that Clyde Tombaugh took. Well, a couple decades after he left, Henry Gicklist led an effort to rephotograph the sky as part of what's called a proper motion survey. I'm seeing how stars change a little bit over time, their position. And this is a project that included, Henry headed it, but Norm Thomas and Robert Burnham did most of the photography and analyzing these on a blink comparator. And when I say Robert Burnham, for those familiar with astronomy, Burnham's Celestial Handbook, that is the Robert Burnham Jr. And so many of these plates right behind me here are ones that Robert Burnham took. And when you think about his Celestial Handbook, so many of the pictures that were taken in there were taken with this telescope, the Lawrence Lowell telescope, which we know better today as the Pluto Discovery Telescope, or the Astrograph, or the Pluto camera. It's got a lot of different names, but most people think about it as the Pluto Discovery Telescope. So, we're talking about the discovery of Pluto, but we have to include Robert Burnham in this discussion also, because this is his legacy behind us also. And I'm going to try this moving my computer around, because in that later proper motion work, Henry and Robert and the whole team used a different blink comparator. I'm going to see if this shows up. It's this big gray, gosh, I don't know if it's, there it is. You can just barely see it. It's that big gray thing. It looks like a military type thing. That's a more quote unquote modern blink comparator, as it were, one that was made in the 1950s. And that one had not an eyepiece on it, but had a screen you looked at. Blink comparators aren't used anymore because as technology moved forward, you had CCDs, charged coupled devices that capture images, and using different logarithms, you can find stuff that way. So there are more modern techniques for doing it today. But the blink comparator is really it was a critical piece of machinery that without it, they would not have discovered Pluto. It's so unlikely. So let's look at a couple more questions here. One from Henry. On Discovery Day, were they going to do confirmation with a 42-inch reflector or the 24-inch refractor? So those are two different telescopes. We have up here the 24-inch refractor is in the big upside-down bucket-looking dome. That's the one visible from downtown Flagstaff. It's been sitting here since 1897. So a dozen years before Arizona was even a state, a dozen plus, I guess, that telescope dome was sitting there. The 42-inch is a telescope that sits a few hundred yards kind of west of that. And if you're familiar with Lowell Observatory, the staff here years ago nicknamed it the Jiffy Pop Dome because it's covered with an aluminum sheeting that looks kind of like the popcorn product, Jiffy Pop. The 42-inch is the telescope that Carl Lamplin used, and the 24-inch was one that other scientists used. But for the confirmation that night, they were going to use the 24-inch. But again, as we heard, it was cloudy, and he wasn't able to do that night. They had to wait for another night. So, there's a little point of confusion that can come up. They did use the 24-inch Clark initially to search for Percival Lowell's Planet X. And then after Pluto's discovery, they also used it to take pictures. Now that they knew where to look in the sky for a planet, they could use the Clark telescope and the 42-inch to zoom in and see it up close. But the discovery was actually made with that small 13-inch telescope and it's called an astrograph because that's the type of telescope used for taking pictures, for taking wide angle pictures of the sky. What you're seeing isn't very magnified, but you get wide angle pictures, which are ideal for, kind of surveying areas of the sky when you're searching for something. And I'll mention, since we talked about the 42-inch telescope, if you watched the video a few nights ago when we did the grounds tour, we made a stop there and talked about that because after Pluto's discovery, the astronomers here photographed it as much as they could, because one of the first things they needed to do was establish its orbit. If you discover a planet and you see it one time in the sky, how do you know how it's moving? You have to observe it night in and night out to determine its path in the sky. And then also, you can look back on old photographic plates, and maybe you can find that it was imaged years ago, and that helps to determine the orbit also. And in fact, the observatory did this in looking back at pictures taken with a 9-inch telescope here in 1915. They went back and predicted where this Pluto would be in 1915. They looked at the plates they had taken, and sure enough, there it was. So that really was helpful in determining the orbit. I had mentioned the 42-inch. Carl Lamplin took a lot of pictures of Pluto after his discovery. Well, just a few years ago, the New Horizons mission flew, past Pluto and got us the remarkable detailed images of Pluto and the Pluto system. As the spacecraft was flying out there, Mark Bowie at the Southwest Research Institute in Boulder, he used to be an astronomer here at Lowell. He worked with Brian Skiff here at the observatory and scanned all of those old plates that Carl Lamplin had taken. And by doing that, they could refine the orbit of Pluto just enough to where it gave them ability to then refine how New Horizons was flying out to make sure it made the best pass possible. So those old pictures taken 80 years ago were still very useful in doing Pluto science, modern Pluto science. So it goes to show you, if you have something like that, don't throw it away, because it still can be very useful. So let's see, we've got a couple more questions here. What would Percival Law have thought about the discovery of Pluto? Well, he would have been thrilled. I think if Percival Law could somehow come back today, February 18th, 2021, he'd be beside himself. In fact, one of our friends earlier wrote in, had to contain Percival Law from jumping up and down in the mausoleum, because he studied Mars. And the reason he set up the observatory here was to prove the existence of intelligent life on Mars. And of course, we know that he was wrong. There's no intelligent life there, but he inspired so many people to want to study Mars and see if there's some sort of life, that the Perseverance spacecraft, one of its main goals is to search for evidence of life from the past or whenever, but some sort of evidence. And that was largely inspired by Percival Law. And Law also searched for this planet for years. He went to his grave not finding it. I think he went to his grave probably unfulfilled. His brother, Abbot Lawrence Lowell, said not finding that planet was Percival Lowell's greatest disappointment. And so he would have loved being able to see this discovery. And what's interesting about it, and maybe a little sad, I guess, is that during Percival's lifetime, that picture had been captured in 1915. They did capture an image of Pluto, but they didn't, the plate wasn't very good. While they had the blink comparator by then, they weren't really systematically searching, and so they didn't see it. It wasn't until years later. So Lowell, in fact, in his time, the planet was imaged. And it makes you wonder if they did image it, what would have happened? What would have been called? There's probably a good chance it would not have been called Pluto. And there's a lot of things that would have changed. But be that as it may, it's part of the story of Pluto. So let's see, we've got about 5 more minutes here. And another question, let's see this. Clyde Tombaugh, what did he do after he discovered Pluto? Well, Clyde, as I mentioned, he spent another dozen plus years here at the observatory. And then he ended up moving to New Mexico. And it's, the history indicates that it's a little bit of an odd departure here at Lowell. He thought he had a position. The observatory said they were out of money, but he ended up leaving. And he eventually moved to New Mexico, to Las Cruces, and became an astronomy professor at New Mexico State University. And that's where he retired from. And he lived into the 1990s, spent the rest of his life there. Clyde and his wife, Patsy, had 2 children, Alden and Annette, and they both still live in Las Cruces. In fact, in our last iHeart Pluto Festival event, which will start at 7 o'clock tonight, Mountain Standard Time, Alden will be on that program talking about the excitement of Pluto and why people love it so much. So Clyde had a very productive life up to this time, and discovering Pluto got him a free ride to Kansas University to study astronomy. And you imagine, here's this kid who's 24 years old. He's in class, and what the professor must have thought, okay, this is the guy that discovered Pluto. Okay, you got an A. Yeah, if you discover a planet, you can just keep going. But it's a neat story with Clyde, and he worked in tracking missiles for a while and looking for artificial satellites of Earth, and then spent a lot of time teaching. And he really did have a passion for teaching, which others in the family carried on that tradition. So let's see, another question here. Let's see this. The glass plate. There's a question about the glass plate. I had mentioned, I think that there's, I'm backwards here, right above my head, you see the darker envelope here, the side. And that's because the original manila envelope that plate was in is up there. And that's one of the Pluto discovery plates. The question was, is the other one up here? And the answer is no. It's at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, where it's been on loan since the Air and Space Museum opened. So it's great to be able to have that in another place where, a place like Air and Space Museum where a lot of people can see it. And in fact, the Blink comparator was also on display there for several years, and it just came back last year, and it's now back on display at the observatory. Oh, here's a question from our friend Laurel Kornfeld, who is all things Pluto. When was Pluto first resolved into a disk by a telescope? Gosh, we should bring in Will Grundy about this, but it wasn't. I could be wrong about this, but I think it wasn't really till the 80s and 90s when you're getting into the Hubble era. Before then, it was just a point of light. And in fact, you can get on the internet, and there are a couple videos that have been created showing the evolution of what we know about Pluto. And it goes from it's not in here, but there's a question mark. Is there even a planet out there? But initially it's a dot. And it went from a dot to a fuzzy dot to a fuzzy sphere to maps made by Mark Bowie, who used to be here, showing darker and lighter areas, the albedo, to New Horizons. So, the world has gone from a dot to this place with active geology that we can view with New Horizons. So it's neat to see that evolution. Looks like we have time for one more question, and looks like one just came in. How many days apart are the 2 discovery plates? There were 6 days apart. One was January 23rd and the other the 29th. And in fact, Clyde had taken one on January 21st, but when he looked at it, realized that it was kind of fuzzy, so he rephotographed it. So they're taken 6 days apart. And that was enough time to where you could see that dot change compared to the background stars and measure it. So just a remarkable, unlikely discovery. 24 years old, Clyde did it. And it's fun for us to be able to relive that discovery here at Lowell Observatory and here in Flagstaff. It's not just a Flagstaff, or it's not just a Lowell Observatory discovery. It's really all of northern Arizona that we think of as the home of Pluto, because it all happened right here. And in fact, Pluto's largest moon, Charon, Jim Christie discovered in 1978 off of pictures taken just 4 miles away from here at the Naval Observatory Flagstaff Station. So it's a really great story. We appreciate you joining us tonight. And again, if you're interested in supporting these programs, I encourage you to go to the iHeart Pluto page and go to that donate opportunity out in the upper right. So thanks for joining us. And in just a little bit at 7 o'clock, we'll offer our last iHeart Pluto Festival program. Why do we love Pluto? Why do we heart Pluto, as we say? And we're going to have a mix of scientists, family members, and community members with that discussion. So thanks for joining us.